In today's video, I'm going to share with you my practice and thought process when it comes to drawing figures from multiple angles. And what are the things I think about when I'm approaching to draw a figure from either way, above, below, or in the middle of the playing field. Please enjoy the video. Welcome back to another video. One of the most asked questions in the past weeks is, how do I practice drawing people from all different angles? And today I want to show you this in a very simple manner, so you can do that yourself. My practice for figures usually goes at least from 30 minutes all up to whatever time frame I have. Also, I have to apologize for my voice. I do sound still a little bit sick, a bit nasal, because I am still sick. So I do apologize for my weird noise today. Now, first what you need a piece of paper. You see this big sheet of paper, right? And you see this is my hand. I have a relatively big hand. So you can imagine how big this piece of paper is. You can do this practice in your sketchbook. You can do it on a A4 size piece of paper. So write this, or you can also do it in big. Depending on how often you do this, think about where to store your images. Art supplies that we're going to use. I suggest, if you're a beginner, doing this definitely with a pencil. If you're a bit more advanced, I would recommend you go for a ink pen. For today's practice session, whenever we want to learn and draw, because what we want is we want to learn to draw figures in different angles. Because we want to give us the possibility, whenever we have to draw a figure in a different angle, for whatever reason, that this is going to be easy for us. The most important part is, when it comes to practicing, whatever you do, is not to rely too much on what you see versus what you understand. So this is the important part. Now, the important part is, how do we make sure that we do not draw what we see versus what we are understanding? Well, that has to do with a habit. The first thing the eye is doing whenever we look at something, it scans the silhouette. Unfortunately, the follow-up that a lot of people, when they start drawing, they look at the silhouette. Problem is, you're gonna have the tendency, so if I just do the silhouette here very quick, that this can become some sort of a flat sticker, right? Becoming one-dimensional. But actually, there's a lot of stuff happening inside, and that's what we want to conquer today, and that's what we want to focus on today, which is going to understand what is happening here. Okay, let's just turn around this page. Okay, so everything that will be below the horizon line is that what we're gonna see from above. So we will be above whatever we're gonna draw. Over the horizon line, we will see from below. Okay? Things are really important to understand. Of course, what I could do now is I could do this here, these vanishing point lines, but this will just confuse a lot of people. And I want to tell you, don't do this now, right? Because when people do this, they start to make very strong convergence to the things they draw. I want you to treat everything you're going to draw in here as an individual object placed in that space. So the practice is going to be very simple. We're going to start with one in the middle, one above, and one below. And then we're just going to switch that up every time. So let's begin with one in the middle. So when I go into drawing this figure now, again, what I don't want to do is I don't want to look at the outside line. Instead, I want to look at the masses and how are they behaving. Okay, and let's just quickly talk about these masses. So we have the head plus neck, we have the torso plus arms, we have the hip plus legs plus feet. Whenever you look at a figure, I want you to dissect the figure in these three groups. Okay, so group A, group B, and group C. It always makes sense, and that's also different from people to people, it always makes sense to either way start from the top or start with the torso. The big problem can happen proportionally is that when you start with the torso and then you apply the head and the neck, that you maybe gonna misproportion the size relationship. And for this, I'm also quickly gonna use the pencil at once just to show how to do this. This guy is almost perfectly in the middle. So his horizon line, and that's the first thing that we need to find, is we need to see where we look above and where we look below, right? So we look at his face and this top part a little bit from below, and we see quite a lot of his feet, right? So let's make a straight line, and let's pretend that the feet gonna be here, right? So we're gonna have the feet in here. He's gonna stand somewhere here. His head will be eventually somewhere in here. What I would do is, what I would start with, I would go in for the mass of the head first. Keeping in mind that the skull is completely oval. And I'm just doing it relatively loose and quick, because that's how I would practice it. Of course, I would try to draw it exact, but I also want to keep it efficient practice-wise. And since I'm also using a pencil, I can also erase. Let's make him a bit older. So I'm not going here for 100% likability, because my goal is not to copy this. My goal is to draw a figure properly in 3D space on this sheet of paper. Okay, so I'm just gonna roughly block this in here. Now I'm going for the torso, keeping in mind that this length is almost 2.5 heads. So I have to orient myself of the skull with width and mass I distribute already. So if now I have pencil, I can also draw in the ribcage in here. So this is the mass that I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for this, but keeping in mind, it's not straight. Even though he's standing relatively straight, this is tilted. Okay? See, I don't even erase here because I don't care, and also I don't have time. It's my practice. Nobody's gonna see this. Okay, and now I have to figure out the moment where we passing the horizon line. And where we start to see things from above. So for example, what is always great are the curves. So looking for the ellipses of stuff like pants or shorts in this case. So they telling me, okay, I'm starting to see things from above now. Now, the moment where I start to see things even more from above gets bigger and bigger, so that means the planes, the top planes of, for example, the boots, everything I see here get more prominent. Or what I did not do, I didn't pay great attention to his posture, because he has a very specific posture. Right, so he has this kind of like, it's like this weird head forward posture. But we can erase a little bit here in the middle. Let's just clean this up. Back side shoulder could be turned a bit more. And this chest, or like whole chest and midsection is a bit too wide. Okay. We don't see his upper arm, it's behind this. Okay, better. Okay, and you're gonna see me that I'm very much simplifying everything here. Because again, whenever I do this for myself, I try to keep it as simple as possible. Also, I'm gonna do this with ink pen. So I can't erase actually, so I can clean it up like this here. Okay, but the biggest factor here right now, the biggest takeaway for the first part of this is I want you to start understanding. First, we need to figure out the horizon line, okay? So where is the horizon line positioned? Okay, how much do we see from above? Or below. And then we have to go into grouping, okay? So we need to figure out where is the torso and the neck area, where are the torso and the arm, and where is the hip and the leg area. And all these parts need to be identified, okay? So it needs to be clear. Do we see these from below or above? And how are they grouped together? Where are the masses? I've done a video a few months ago which was about the stacking method. When I communicate the stacking method, I showed everyone this here. So that we are literally learning to stack boxes on top of each other. Right? So, and this is actually what we are doing with identifying these areas. So you can think of this such as this is going to be your head and neck. This is going to be your torso plus arms. And this is going to be your hip, legs, and feet. Because we could put this guy into a box and we can definitely say, okay, we see this amount of this guy of the box, right? Let me zoom out here. Because we have the ground plane. And we see where the head ends, right? Let's do another one from above and let's do one also from below. Okay, I'm gonna draw now one figure which will be below the horizon line and we're gonna see more from above. So we see mostly of the top part of the figure. And to speed it up, I'm gonna use ink now, so I'm gonna directly draw in with ink. Now let's again identify the masses, right? So we are seeing a big part now because we are relatively close to the figure, but also the angle is more extreme, so the camera went right above the figure. We see more of the head is relatively big, and the neck area. Then we're gonna have the torso and the arms as a group. Also, you're gonna see and notice that from this point on, we're gonna have a stronger conversion, which means that everything going downwards will be more like a cylinder that gets thinner and thinner at the end. Let me draw in this guy quick. So again, keep in mind that the head is bigger now because it's closer to camera, so the foreshortening. He looks the way when I have food with too many veggies on my plate. I'm just kidding. Veggies are good. I love veggies. Okay, let me draw on the hair, just indicating this. Keeping in mind, I don't focus here on likability. So the goal is to communicate. And to keep practice efficient. Okay, so roughly the head. Now, keeping in mind that this is going to be smaller, so we see much less of the neck. And if you have references with a figure without clothing, that's a bit easier. Or maybe not. I always find it actually like no difference if I make it with or without. But I know that some people, for them it's easier without clothing. For some people it is easy with clothing. So, but I think it makes sense if you start with figures without clothing. Now the sewing line is a great understanding here for how the torso part and the pose is behaving. So these lines are great because they are kind of like cutting everything apart for me. So the midsection gets shorter as well. So everything is kind of like separated in here. Same as the arms, they are disappearing behind the back. Good for me, so I don't need to demo so much. Don't need to draw so much of the arms. It can be faster. Now let's attach the hip. And in a moment I also will explain my thought process for the legs here. I have to quickly make sure that I don't mess them up, because doing it and talking at the same time is quite tricky for me. Okay. First, we identified where is the horizon line. Okay. So again, horizon line now is all up here. So we don't see the horizon line. So we see actually a lot from the figure above. Okay, so now we see way more from here. And this is the area, this is the part I'm utilizing for my torso, for my head and my neck, right? So head and neck area is all this mass. And then the other part, basically the other group, is this. Torso and arms. But here we need to keep in mind that this has a convergence, right? It goes down. Means that the legs are a great example because they are basically cylinders, which the further they go, the thinner they get. And we need to keep in mind that there is this translational form downwards, because this is gonna be somewhere in here where the figure is standing. Okay, so that's why the grouping is so important. First step is always, where's my horizon line? Second of all, how are my things grouped? What you can also ask yourself, depending on what the lens is, what is my convergence? So you can see that this thought process of drawing the figure either way more in a baseline horizon line or either way more from below or above works all the time. The important part is that we do not rely on what it is that we see, but more of what it is that we understand. And in order to understand, we need to really ask ourselves these questions in order to set it properly in. Draw a figure here, now I draw a figure in the middle, now I draw a figure here. Or I can also say every time I put a figure on the paper, it's going to have its own individual horizon line. And that will still work. Why? Because it has communication of dimensions. As long as you can communicate the masses correctly, you will have an easier time for this. Let's also draw one figure above the horizon line, just that you also have an example, and then let's quickly talk about what could be the potential homework for this. When you go for images where you look for people where the horizon line is really low, the big trouble part now will be the opposite of what we had here, right? Now it will be the other way. So the legs will take the biggest part of what we see, and the head is going to be the smallest part. So it's the opposite. That is the hardest part to deal. And also, of course, the more and most extreme you go, the harder it goes. Because if you look at here, you see how small the head is actually. If you do that for the first time, I wouldn't recommend doing something extreme like this. Although it's really good if you're managed to do it, because the more challenging, the better. Also, what we can observe is that there is very clearly a horizon line. Okay, let's draw this one. And I'm not gonna explain the process here again. Unfortunately, now the sun comes in very strong here, but I think you guys can still see. Now the horizon line is basically here. So where the shoes are, okay? That's a good landmark. Also relatively small. Sorry for the sun. I mean, I'm happy that the sun came out, but it just destroys my lighting setup. Okay, so again, we're drawing the head from below. Now, since their angle is very much extreme from below, we see how low the ears are setting. Also, we can utilize this area here to communicate there is a plane. So here there's this shadow wrapping around. Okay, and there is the moment now where we need to be aware, okay, this is now my cylinder. Also again, the cylinder, the ellipse, the lower ellipse of that cylinder here is already bigger than this one because of the convergence. Okay, we have to constantly be aware of this. Then we have a very clear overlap of the shoulders. Now everything gets closer, everything gets bigger the closer it gets to us. This hand disappears in the pocket. Good for us. Simple to draw. Now we have another grouping, right? Now in that case, let me use a box as an example. Where the lower part is bigger than the upper part. Because again, convergent. Okay, ongoing. So that means the legs are more than double the size of what we already drew, because the head is really small, right? I actually, in my opinion, I drew the head a little bit too big still. But it's okay, we can get away with it. Let's draw on the legs. And the leg now is a tube, a elongated tube that gets bigger ended at the lower area, right? Always keep that in mind. You can even overdo it. I can get away with it. The only thing here, what we need to see is that his backside leg goes a bit backwards, right? So the convergence is not as strong as for the other leg. But still it gets and gonna be a super long leg. So now the shoes, and the shoes are really big. And since he lifts his shoe up, we see a bit of the bottom side. I'm going to simplify that here to speed up this a bit. Like this. There's this sewing line also helping us to communicate the form of the pants. And then also here, like this. Okay. Just also simplify this here, because I'm lazy. Not paying big attention here for the shoes, but it's just for the matter of the demonstration. Okay. And then here also adding the sewing line, following the pants as well. In here, also here's some folds. Bam, bam, bam. Like this. And for the legs, we go for cylinders. And always keep in mind that the lower ellipse now is bigger, of course, because we have this super strong convergence going on, right? It's ongoing. That's why the shoe is so big at the end. When the shoe becomes a box again, it's also bigger again. Okay, so I want you to always be aware of this, because perspective and spacing is an ongoing thing, right? It never ends. So if I have an object here and I have the same object here in convergence, there will be change in space from here to here. As a homework assignment, when you want to practice this, I would advise you to fill the full page with these type of figures. Always go horizon line, grouping, and then keep the convergence in mind. If you have more questions, please drop it in the comments below. Also, if you're interested in one-on-one lessons with me, make sure to check out my website. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.